Welcome to StereoPsych. I'm Stephen Downey, a clinical psychologist from Australia. Today we'll be doing actually a second breakdown on the Am I the Asshole Reddit thread. First one was a bit odd, so I thought I'd do a second one and see if hopefully I can nail it a bit better this time. So we'll be moving to the second one, which is a break from routine. I'm normally quite robotic, but here we are. As usual, we'll be reading through it, then doing sort of a breakdown on how I would think about this kind of a thing as a psychologist. So we'll rip into that. Anything I'm missing here? So obviously, feel free to give your opinion in the comments, or like it if you like it, subscribe if you want to see more like this. So let's get into this one. All right, okay, it's not too long. Right, am I the asshole for insisting we get a paternity test before I sign the birth certificate? All right, that could be funky. We had one very similar to this recently, so let's see if it's the same. All right, my girlfriend and I believe in ENM. We aren't saying it's right for everyone, but it works for us. I work in town and have several partners for when she's working. She works at a huge construction project on the West Coast and flies home for 1 week after working for 2. Since the men outnumber the women there, like 30 to 1, she has no problems finding partners. Recently, she's gotten pregnant. We're always careful and use protection, but I realize this isn't always 100% effective. I'm excited for a baby and happy we're starting a family. However, I don't have any interest in paying to raise someone else's child. I told her that we need to get a paternity test. She said that I was the father. I said that's awesome. I just needed proof. She said no. I said that without proof, I wasn't signing the birth certificate and that I'd be moving out so I could not be said to have acted as a parent. She thinks that because we're in a relationship, I need to step up. Like I said, I have no problems raising a child that isn't mine. I just won't pay for the privilege. Am I the asshole? An edit has been added. I edited my post because it was pointed out that I called her my wife. We are not married, just a long-term relationship. Okay. Right, so first off the bat, the edit triggers the living crap out of me. The just a long-term relationship drives me nuts. I may come back to that, may not. Where would I start in a situation like this? Okay, so what do we have here? We have a ENM. So I am clearly uneducated in this. So let me drag this over and briefly check what the hell ENM means. ENM relationship. In case you're wondering, absolutely, we Google stuff. We're just like doctors. Ethical non-monogamy. Okay, right. Yep. So essentially means that the relationship is not fully monogamous and may involve having multiple sexual or romantic connection with the understanding and consent of all the parties involved. Fair enough. Yeah. So again, we're back to essentially an open relationship. I don't know why they don't say open relationship, but here we are. Okay. And so let's run through the situation. So girlfriend and I believe in ENM, saying it's right for everyone, works for us, which is fine. So they seem to have discussed this. There's some communication. That's nice. Obviously the communication has not extended to, in the event that you fall pregnant, do I have the right to request a paternity test? Clearly that discussion has not happened because it's happening at the moment. Again, these are things that you don't necessarily think about, but I usually tell people relationship agreements, they're pretty bloody important for these sorts of reasons because you want to know this in advance. I'm also a little confused in terms of in the event that you take parenthood as the father, what is to stop you from getting a paternity test? And then is there not a process to be removed from a birth certificate if you are not the father? I'm curious about that because I've never seen it, but I'm also sort of wondering, surely that's an option here. So anyway, we'll keep working from there. He's basically saying she has no problem finding partners. So essentially both of them have sex with people who are not each other, which is the whole point, I believe, of this ethical non-monogamy. I'm just going to say open relationship. That irritates me. It just, as a psychologist, I know this is a pet peeve, but it irritates me when people use unique names for common conditions. It's just like, just use the common name, right? Just say open relationship. That's what everybody understands. And there isn't, as far as I'm looking at, and as far as the definition is, there isn't a difference that makes it unique from open relationships. So for the sake of just interpreting in plain English, please use just the common term. It's so much easier. She's got pregnant, fair enough. I realize it's not always 100% excited. Effective. I'm excited for a baby. This is somebody who strikes me as, yep, not opposed to it, but because we're careful and always use protection, he believes there is a reasonable chance that this child is not mine, right? Is that reasonable under the circumstances? Absolutely. I think if we look at it from this bloke's point of view, both of them are having sex with partners that are, both of them are having sex with partners that are not each other, which basically means there is a potential for pregnancy, both him getting somebody else pregnant or somebody getting her pregnant. And he's saying, right, this is realistic. Now, what comes here is we are always careful and use protection. This is somebody who has reason to believe that the child may not, in fact, be theirs, in which case he would like to check, right? He's not saying, I'm not the father. He's saying, the only thing that I have to go on here is that you're saying I'm the father, when in fact, I would like more proof here, right? So the other day we reviewed a situation where when somebody wasn't sure that they were in fact the partner and they've asked for a paternity test, the other person said, no, you won't have that. And the person goes on to be treated like crap indefinitely. This actually feels a little bit like the start of that story, because this sounds like the kind of man who potentially is going to have an issue raising a child that's not his. To me personally, that is important because, if I was the mum, I would want to be upfront about that, right? I don't get the idea that this is an absolute deal breaker, but it looks to me like she's turning it into a deal breaker, the way that she's acting, right? So the way that he's going, I'm moving out, so I could not be said to have acted as a parent, right? Again, that's a big move. You're basically saying, I don't trust you to the extent where I now believe that this is not my child, right? So, right, where would I go with this? Brief one would be the difference between stress and anxiety, right? And I'm going somewhere with this, so stick with me. Generally, stress is something that you and I can look at and go, yes, we can both see it. There is a stress there, So in this case, a stress would be pregnant partner, bringing child into the world. Fair enough, that's a stress. We can both see that this is the train tracks that this is on. Fair enough, right? Now, future situation where child is not mine. Okay, sort of hanging in there, but I can't see that yet. I don't have the information that I would need to know to be able to see what you're seeing. I can understand why you think it, but I can't see it. Moving out, so I could not be said to have acted as a parent, right? So now we're taking action based on what we think to be true, but we can't know to be true. And this is actually what I usually use in terms of this similar thing here to explain to people the difference between stress and anxiety. In terms of stress, we can both see it. In terms of this, he's starting to make decisions in the here and now about things that he is uncertain about. Generally speaking, that's what we call anxiety. So I'd look at that and sort of say, okay, there's a bit of anxiety in here. I understand that the anxiety has reason, but it is still anxiety because we're taking action based on things that we can't know. Now, she thinks that because we're in a relationship, I need to step up. Well, hang on just a second. This is where we start running into issues. I have said before that open relationships just bring problems that other relationship types do not share. And this is one of them, Do you have a relationship agreement that says in the event that I get somebody else pregnant or you get pregnant by somebody else, the child is considered a product of our relationship regardless? And it's like, well, it doesn't sound like that's a conversation that happened. And I would encourage people, if you're somebody in an open relationship who has not considered that question, it might be bloody well worth asking that question. So if a child is produced by one of us, are we jointly responsible for that child or not? Because let's say this bloke doesn't get put on the birth certificate and acts as the father, we could end up in the stepfather situation we saw a little while ago where, gets to the age of, 12, they separate and she says, well, you were never the father anyway. And he no longer has access to the child that he raised as his own. Well, okay, I would argue that there's an ethical wrong in that. Now, I understand the peanut gallery is going to come for me. Fine, I don't care. This is the point where she's basically saying, step up. I would assume the stepping up involves shared parenting. Fair enough. How does that go? What if he's not the father? how does that work in the future in terms of, you know, let's say they break up, can she get the paternity test and take the kid if it's not his? You know, so it's that stuff that the discussions that I have with blokes very often go along these lines where it's an anxious thinking style, but it's one that I find blokes are very familiar with, because when it comes to these sorts of situations, yeah, you know, there's a real fear there of, like, let's say I don't get the paternity test and then one day you prove I'm not the father because you vindictively want to cut me out of this child's life. And there's a very good chance that you could successfully do that. And I find that the blokes that I'm talking with are just terrified in this situation. And there is obviously the reason for that is women don't need to prove maternity because they are the mothers. Like, they literally push them out, whereas the blokes do. And is that a problem? No, but there is unfortunately like a different set of expectations and rights that are available based on each. And blokes find themselves in these situations. And I think with what's been around the internet in the last few years, it's becoming more and more common to see interactions like this, where the blokes are sort of concerned about situations that ultimately come to fruition. So I don't think that his fears are ungrounded, but at the same token, we're in a tricky position here where, let's put you in the head of the psychologist, right? I have no idea if this if this man is the father of this child or not. His thinking style appears to be anxious, and he's starting to take action in the here and now that impact whatever future is ahead of him. But there are some grounds for why he's doing that. But the crux of all of this is actually centered on trust. All right. The trust, he's asking for proof that would answer the question of the trust, which is fine. But then he's stuck at the point with, if she doesn't come through with that answer for the trust, what am I going to do? You know, and I think that, you know, we're now needing to take action based on uncertainty. So, you know, we see in the other situation we did a few days ago, the bloke's like, oh, fine, I'll raise the child, but I'll raise the child as not mine. And that's just a whole vindictive garbage set that turns out the child is his and he's made a terrible mistake. You know, this just feels like the beginning of an am I their asshole Reddit thread that we're reading in 20 years' time from this kid, you know? So now, what is an answer here? Obviously, you get the paternity test. You know, like, I do not understand the fights over this. It's sort of like, I feel like this bloke has a reasonable argument. We're always careful and use protection. So for this child to be mine, it's almost like it needs to be an accident, versus, I don't know what you're doing with other people. That might not need to be an accident. Therefore, I would like the test. This seems like a reasonable request. And I think where the bloke's mind goes, because my mind went there, and I usually use that as my guide to where somebody else's mind went, is, if you don't want to do the test, you're not actually sure. You know? And I think it's a good argument that the correct answer is the paternity test. So, you know, now we'll jump to the part that triggers the crap out of me. Called her my wife. We're not married, just a long-term relationship, right? Okay. This becomes an issue regarding, so we're in an open relationship, but generally speaking, we consider these days to be as committed as a married relationship. And yet what I find again and again as a psychologist is that the level of commitment is truly different. And people are just a long-term relationship. And I find that to be kind of irritating, because as a psychologist, it reduces the tools in my toolkit, right? Commitment is commitment. And sometimes we as psychologists are looking for tools to sort of help go, what is this person's values? But it feels like with this person, right? And I don't know exactly this, but sometimes it can feel like, when I feel like I've found what their value is, it's like, okay, because essentially sometimes, so from a therapeutic standpoint, and let's say ACT, I'm looking to find somebody's values, right? And help them bed them down in concrete terms. And then we go, what are the actions that flow from these values? The issue is when we have a a difficulty bedding down the values, and they keep morphing. And I go to grab it and I go, oh, a committed long-term relationship. It's, oh, just a long-term relationship. Oh, she wants you to step up. Is there some kind of values around parenthood and stuff like that? You're excited for parenthood. You know, no problem raising a child that isn't mine, but I'm not going to pay for the privilege. What do you mean by that? Like, were you going to split the bills forever on this kid? Like, have you thought through what this means? It becomes like finding values is like picking up like dry sand with your fingers. And it can make it very difficult to work with people who don't have better down values. So it's not like just that I'm on some kind of a soapbox around the difference. It's when the rubber really hits the road regarding life issues, people typically have to drop back to values, or a lot of psychologists, that's what we're going to do. The issue that I see here is it feels like the values keep changing, you know? And it's sort of like ethical non-monogamy is sort of like, well, okay, that's not different to open relationship, but the general expectation of an open relationship is this is a committed relationship. So then if you just move out so as not to be a potential father to a child that's not yours, it's like, well, hang on. Was this a discussion that didn't happen? You know, I know that I've joked about this before, but I feel like a lot of these come down to communication, you know, talking about things. And when it comes to something like this, there has to be a willingness to compromise. I am surprised sometimes at the women, the women that don't do the paternity test thing. It's a little bit like I see, frankly, a similar kind of resistance to women getting paternity tests done as blokes admitting that their child might in fact be autistic. There's just this, you run into an absolute wall and it just doesn't happen. And it's like, what is the problem? And I truly don't understand it. I really do not understand exactly why this is a roadblock, but it's something that I have seen quite a few times, not just here, but also in my work. I'm curious. I'm sure there's a bunch of cultural factors at play. There must be, because this is fairly consistent over time. But, you know, it feels like the answer is a paternity test. Is she concerned that it wouldn't? And then what? You know, he said, oh, I'll stick around. But is she worried about essentially having to effectively single mum? And it's sort of like maybe she looks at this and goes, I'm in a lose-lose situation. If I take the paternity test and it's not his, he's not going to contribute towards the expense of the child. But old mate who I had a one-night stand with, he ain't interested in stepping up to be a dad either. My best bet here is to ride this out and hope that he comes home. And then he can raise a child that might not be his and we'll just never know. And somehow that's not going to turn into a resentment that eats away at the relationship. But that's the only thing I can think of that is the thinking style here, that she's done it out and sort of like, there's the only situation here where I have any kind of a win is him giving up. You know, it's like, but that's not a win long term. That's not a compromise. That is holding a gun to somebody's head and basically saying you'll either come around or you're stuffed. And it's sort of that's I guess what I see in this scenario, and him going, I refuse to have a gun held to my head, so pull the trigger. Actually, you know what? I'll pull the trigger myself. How about that? And she's going, that's not what I want. You know? So yeah, strange situation, but there we go. That was a more I found that to be a more interesting breakdown than the previous one. Yeah, I think this has the usual elements of communication, bits and pieces like that, but also a somewhat complicated scenario where I don't look at this bloke and see an asshole. I see somebody who is taking fairly reasonable actions based on what I consider to be a fairly reasonable request. People say, oh, well, you know, you agreed to an open relationship, but then you're not agreeing to the consequences of an open relationship. I think that, yeah, that's possibly a valid criticism here, but I also don't think that it was part of what's been talked about in their relationship, you know? So maybe a takeaway here is that if you want to do an open relationship, you need to be having a discussion around, okay, let's say one of us gets somebody pregnant or gets pregnant. Where does that fit within the relationship? Am I entitled to paternity tests and things like that? Yeah, just to sort of get the idea around, or rather discuss in advance, because this would be a heckin' tricky position to find yourself in and then be working backwards. And ultimately, Yeah, this bloke says he's moving out. Um, you know, they're tricky. If you're doing an open relationship of any kind, I strongly recommend that you actually sit down and write out a relationship agreement that you can sort of edit and add to over time so that this kind of stuff is answered. Because it's difficult to see a pathway forward if she's completely inflexible on the paternity test, and it's something that you sort of wish had been discussed in advance. So let's finish up there. We shall do that. That'll be the second one for today. But yeah, I guess that's kind of fun. So let's finish up there. Good to see everybody, and we'll catch you in the next one. See you.